Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Servpro. Big word of thanks here off the top. Some days it's just sort of crazy. Today was kind of one of those days. I travel a long distance to get here. Traffic was terrible today. There's all kinds of, crazy things going on, too. We've had major issues with one of our video platforms. I say this a lot, there's almost always a problem child. We were on 50 platforms, whatever it is. There's almost always one of them that's not quite playing the way it's supposed to. And we've had people, Jay Black and Cody and Kaylee and all kinds of people. Todd, one of our, technical type people. We've had a lot. Danny's here today. We've had a lot of people working behind the scenes to make the show go smoothly. So really, really appreciative of that. We strive to be sort of like a duck, gliding smoothly on the top of the water while underneath there's a lot of churning going on. So that is the case today. I have on my Sugar Bowl sweatshirt today, by the way, if you're wondering. I don't know. It looks very casual on screen. It didn't necessarily present that way. When I was getting dressed this morning, but it's sort of giving pajamas right now, which is not exactly what I was looking for. But nonetheless, let me get some of your comments. We are on DawgNation.com, which is a more significant feat that you probably realize. So let's get some comments here. Andrew Sisson says he agreed with John Stinchcombe's definition of DGD yesterday. I'll tell you, this is one of those conversations that to Georgia fans really matters. And I have heard a lot of interesting comments about that. Some of it comes from our comment section. Some of it comes from replies on X or something along those lines. There are a lot of Georgia fans who have weighed in on that topic in what I would say is a very thoughtful way, and I really appreciate that. This is the sort of thing that, should matter to Georgia fans, about how you want to remember and reflect on people who've been a part of the program. And the one thing that I kind of believe in that I think a lot of other people don't is that I do think that that what it constitutes a DGD is sort of a large club. And, there's obviously a smaller list of all-time great players. But honestly, and this is where I, kind of a little bit different than some of y'all, I don't want, DGD to be exclusive to solely those who've been all-time great players. Because, frankly, I think of a lot of you, viewers to our show, listeners, commenters. I think of a lot of you as sort of being DGDs, people who make a significant contribution to Georgia over the course of a lifetime. And so, as I said before, I've been really fascinated by some of the commentary around all of that. UGA Marine says it looked like Darth BA with the black on black. Yeah, they definitely went dark mode with the Sugar Bowl logo, almost too dark to the point where you can't even really see it. You almost get a little bit of a grayish hue, get it to stand out just a little bit more. Yeah, perhaps that's the place. Randy Hall mentioning that the Dogs are really showing out in the playoffs. Yeah, Matt Stafford became the latest example of that last night. Some of y'all know the NFL better than I do. So Stafford's a Super Bowl champ. And by the way, how about just a disappointing loss to the Minnesota Vikings, man? That is a franchise that has really had some hard luck over the course of my lifetime. But if Stafford puts another playoff run together here, and what you got to imagine is sort of the later part of his career, boy, that kind of changed the way he's remembered. I mean, he's already going to be remembered as, I think, a great player. But, I mean, you add another, playoff chapter to that story, I think Stafford's legacy gets really interesting at that point, doesn't it? Let's see what else. Andrew Sisson also says it's a great day to be a dog. I totally agree with that. We're in a great mood today. Laura Raines checking in from Las Vegas. We're glad to have her here. Let's see what else. Yeah, Yard Dog also kind of weighing on the DGD thing. Yeah, I think all that's really interesting. And the one thing that I try to do is I try to share my opinion just from the perspective that I've gained from my time being around. But we also want to give a lot of platform to other people to share, various opinions, including our guests. We'll do some more of that with a couple of guests today. but also with our comments here. We try to make some space for that. UGA Marine says if Drew Brees is Hall of Fame, then Matt Stafford is Hall of Fame too. That's an interesting comparison. I mean, I would say that, I really liked Drew Brees as a player, but I guess the point that I'm kind of getting to, beating around the bush, I guess a little bit is, if it's another playoff run here, that does kind of change Stafford's Hall of Fame candidacy, doesn't it? I won't pretend to be an expert on who is and isn't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but it seems like it probably does. Kayla Meyer says, I love hearing the former players on the show. They have the best and most accurate perspectives. John seems like a smart guy. Yeah, John is a smart guy, and I do appreciate these former players too. We're really lucky with the fact that we get a chance to do that and kind of be just have their perspective, because you do gain insight and knowledge by playing the game that I'm not going to have. And I do, like, we'll talk to Jake Fromm here in a little bit. That's a guy that's been in locker rooms with Kirby Smart, on the field with Kirby Smart, screamed at by Kirby Smart. Like, there is just something you learn from that I'll never know. And, listen, obviously everybody's kind of in love with their own opinions. I'm no different on that. You can't help but be that way sometimes. But I also try to have a large, hopefully anyway, maybe don't always succeed, but hopefully kind of a large degree of humility. I try to appreciate what it is that I don't know. And as a way of making the show better, I try to fill in the gaps of what I don't know with people who I think know better than me. And there is certainly no, shortage of people who could perhaps step in with more knowledge than I have. But either way, I'm glad that you enjoy that. We enjoy that too. All right, we got a fun show. Let me get ready to fire up the animation here, and we'll tell everybody about it. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adamson. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Servpro. Said this a moment ago. Want to reiterate it. A lot of folks behind the scenes working to make this show smooth today. Really appreciate that. I won't bore you with all the details, but putting this together sometimes a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and so we get a lot of people who are doing great work on that, and I really appreciate that. However, of all my gratitude, the gratitude I have the most for is all of you who tune in and get ready to watch us here right now. So we have worked very hard to plan something I think interesting for you. It's Jake Fromm today. There's obviously a lot going on with the Georgia quarterback position, so we'll talk to Jake about that here on the program today. Connor Riley stops by too. One of the things we're going to get into with Connor is very kind of quiet here late in the process. There is still some rumblings and grumblings about Georgia in the transfer portal. For instance, Deshaun Purdy, what may have happened there with the former Charlotte 49er quarterback, also late of the Florida Gators. What's going on there? We'll do some of that with Connor. I'll celebrate a former Dawg, getting a lot of love here right now for very good reasons. But off the top of the program, I think kind of a cool reminder that even though Georgia's season admittedly ended with disappointment here in 2024, there is still plenty of optimism and reason for it here in 2025. So we'll talk about that. We're glad that you're with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Servpro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Servpro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So in a weird way, I love this time of year for shows. My brain is just wired weird, probably. And it's not that I don't love the kind of in-season part of our experience here. I love that too. But when you get to this time of year, early calendar year, pre-spring, and kind of the time in which sometimes the college football season, the next one, feels as far away as it's ever going to be, I think you get a chance to be, I guess, a little more stretch your legs. You have an opportunity to be a little bit more creative, what you choose to talk about. There's just a little bit more freedom for the discussion you want to be able to have. And so if you don't mind, for a couple of minutes here, I want to try to exercise my freedom, given the fact that you can just sort of talk about whatever. You got the transfer portal winding down. You got, the last remnants of a season taking place with a national championship on Monday. but you also are kind of at the doorstep of the following season, the upcoming season. And I sort of have that on my mind a little bit. So I want to kind of discuss that for a moment. I wanted to sort of discuss it in what might be a slightly odd way. I want to talk for a moment about the 1998 Atlanta Braves. Now, everybody sort of knows the 98 Braves now because of the song by Morgan Wallen a couple years ago. And I will admit, even though Morgan Wallen's kind of a Tennessee guy, I really felt like I sort of bonded with Morgan Wallen over this song and kind of became a little bit more of a Morgan Wallen fan than I had been before because that song really spoke to me. Like, that's my era, man. That's, that was a season in my sporting fandom life that really shaped me. And I was like, man, I'm glad that Morgan Wallen and I are kind of on the same page about this. And then I sort of did the math in my head and was like, wait a second. Was Morgan Wallen even alive when this song, when the 98 Braves were taking place? I feel like this song, while it's meaningful to me, I'm actually not quite so sure how meaningful this actually is to him in his own lived experience. But either way, it's kind of nice to have memorialized in song a really disappointing postseason loss. If you're close to my age and if you are old enough to remember the 1998 Atlanta Braves, nice to have memorialized in song a really disappointing postseason loss. And I'll tell you, for those of you who are not quite old enough, what happened was, the Braves had kind of come up as, this sort of from worst to first, out of nowhere team, early 90s, kind of started getting to the World Series, finally won a World Series in 1995. And after that, if we're being honest, and I hate to say this because I love the Braves, but after that 95 World Series, there was a little bit of regression where, like, they got back to World Series in 96. They got to the NLCS in 97. Now they're losing to, like, the Florida Marlins, which seems sort of embarrassing. And then in 1998, they lose in the NLCS again to a San Diego Padres team that had never been good in my lifetime, with some of the same players from the Marlins now playing for the Padres. And I got to tell you, living in Atlanta at the time, I was, either a sophomore or junior in college, somewhere around that, span. Sports was like the most important thing in the world to me. Very little responsibility. Just all about sports, Georgia Braves, things like that, just so into sports. And, man, when the Braves lost in that 1998 NLCS, it was really, really just devastating, so disappointing. And I'll tell you, having been around and kind of alive during all that, there are a lot of Braves fans who were really mad. And there was one thing in particular I remember people being really mad about. And I went this morning, I tried to find evidence of this to share with you on the show, and I couldn't. So you're going to have to take my word on this for a moment. But there was a moment at the end of the 1998 National League Championship Series. And I don't take pleasure in saying this because this is one of my favorite players of all time. But John Smoltz said something in, like, the post-game locker room and after that series was over that kind of got on a lot of Braves fans' nerves. Now, I'm going to have to paraphrase here because I'm remembering from a long time in the past, and who knows. If you want to fact check me on this, maybe I don't have my facts exactly right, but something along the lines of, well, the guys in this locker room, we feel like we'll be right back here in this same spot next year, and I'm not quite so sure the guys on the other side of the field necessarily feel that way. Meaning, okay, San Diego, you may have beaten us, but this is all you're ever going to do, whereas we'll be kind of right back in this same spot again. And I got to tell you, for a lot of people, even though Smoltz was just as popular then as he is now, for a lot of people, that really kind of got on our nerves of, man, you're not taking this as hard as you should. You're not treating this the right way. The idea that you just sort of shrug off the loss and say, well, we'll be right back here in the same spot next year. San Diego won't be able to say that. Like, for a lot of Braves fans, they didn't really speak to the pain that they had at that time with that particular outcome. Although history has proven John Smoltz right. San Diego, essentially, they haven't won anything since then, right? I mean, I think that was the last time they were in until, obviously they're pretty good now, but until, recently they hadn't been good at all since 1998. So what John Smoltz said turned out to be somewhat prophetic. Braves would be back in the National League Championship Series the following year, and they got to the World Series at least. So I think a lot of us who were mad at Smoltz at the time were probably into our own feelings a little bit too much, and what Smoltz was saying was at least factually true, even if it didn't quite match the emotion of the moment. Now, you may be wondering what all of this is about. So let me bring this back to Georgia football this way, which is, even if some Braves fans didn't love what Smoltz said at the time way back then, there was sort of an obvious truth to it, which is, hey, sometimes seasons end in disappointment. There's nothing you can do about that. But you do want to sort of strive to be the sort of organization where you believe that you can shake off losses and get right back to the business of competing the following year in the exact same way. That's what the Atlanta Braves were. That's what Georgia football is now. And frankly, Georgia football is probably, at least in this short span of time, an even more successful version of that than the Braves were way back then. That Georgia did have a disappointing loss. And listen, I have been open about this. Like, when I think about what happened to Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, losing to what I would say a team like Notre Dame, we don't usually see Georgia lose non-conference games. We take pride in the idea that Georgia's just going to have way better players than a team like Notre Dame. That's just something we've sort of, kind of hung our hat on, as arrogant and cocky as that might be, that I think also accurately reflects the feeling of many Georgia fans that, you just sort of come to expect Georgia to win these type of games. But this year, that didn't happen. And if you're a Georgia fan, you're sort of left to wonder, okay, well, what do you do about that? All of a sudden, this sort of bulletproof mentality that you think Georgia takes into these sorts of games, all of a sudden now maybe you feel like that's been punctured just a little bit. So what do you do with all of that? Well, I think Georgia will do, just like John Smoltz said the Atlanta Braves once did, which was dust themselves off and get right back to work with the genuine, authentic belief that they'll be right back in the championship pursuit next year. And as arrogant as this might sound, in a way that I don't know is true for the team that beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, Notre Dame. Let's be honest. A lot of the success that Notre Dame has had this year has come with transfer players, meaning that as they move on, Notre Dame's going to have to repopulate the roster with a whole bunch of guys from probably outside the program, and sometimes that doesn't always work as consistently as you would like. Whereas Georgia, no matter how devastating and disappointing the conclusion to this season was, Georgia has a lot of reason to believe that there is a standard in place for this program that will be no less, true, will not be tarnished simply because of the fact that it lost to Notre Dame. And I'll tell you a guy who spoke very well on this topic. It's Dan Jackson. And there were so many great Georgia players. We throw around the phrase DGD a lot. To me, Dan Jackson is a DGD, the kind of person that has represented Georgia very well and has made, I think, almost an incalculable contribution to Georgia. And one of the hard things about that Sugar Bowl loss is a guy like Jackson played his last game for Georgia. But even in the final moment of his Georgia career, as his playing time here at UGA was coming to a close, Jackson remained such an articulate spokesman for kind of what makes Georgia, Georgia. And along the lines of, hey, you may have lost, but you believe you'll be back in the pursuit of a championship again next year. I thought that Dan Jackson said it really well in terms of just how much that belief, even after a setback, remains ingrained in the Georgia program for the players who've now played their final game, for the young players who'll step in to replace them next year, in sort of a perpetual cycle that Georgia just appreciates the standard that it's set for itself. This is how Dan Jackson said that after the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, it's every year. I mean, that's the University of Georgia. That's all I've known, and that's all that will be known from this university long after I'm gone, because that's the standard that's built before me, and that I've tried my best to uphold, and that's a standard. When you put on this G, that's what it means, and for all the young guys coming in, they know that, and I'm excited to come back and watch them win.
What an awesome quote from Dan Jackson. What a great guy. What a remarkable career. The story of Jackson has been told, needs to be told more. Just amazing. And I love the way in which he punctuates that statement with, hey, I can't wait to come back and watch these guys win. And I love that level of confidence that Jackson has, not in himself, but in the program that he leaves behind and the new standard bearers who will try to do for UGA what Jackson has done so frequently. And I got to tell you, I think today, just based on, the observations of conversations that I've seen over the course of the last few weeks, I do think there's a degree to which, and I don't say this in like any kind of critical way, I'm just trying to make an observation, I do think there's a degree to which Georgia fans should borrow some of Dan Jackson's confidence and should realize that, hey, Georgia may have lost a game and it stinks. You hate to lose. You especially hate to lose to the sort of team that you don't really expect to lose to. That's all, pretty disappointing. But that doesn't mean the outlook for Georgia has changed at all, that the standard will remain the standard, and that Jackson expects to come back for many years to come and watch Georgia win at a similar level, you would assume, that he saw Georgia win while he was playing for UGA. And I love that. And believe it or not, there's already, from kind of outside the boundaries of DawgNation, from more objective voices, there's already some, I think, pretty critical data here that indicates that what Jackson kind of prophesies may turn out to be true, and perhaps flying in the face of what many Georgia fans maybe assume would be true about Georgia for the upcoming season, because we live face first in this stuff all the time. And we're wondering about what life's going to be like for Georgia next year with a new starting quarterback playing for a full season, how they fix some of the issues along the offensive line. Can they reduce the drops among wide receivers? How do you replace guys like Jalen Walker and all the really, outstanding players that are being lost off the Georgia defense? We are so attuned to all these unanswered questions for Georgia that I think it leads to a lot of us, Georgia fans who are watching, listening, interacting with us. I think it leads to a lot of angst sometimes about Georgia fans, where you kind of you don't really know what the next season is going to bring. And perhaps right now, on the basis of a disappointing loss, maybe Georgia fans are kind of less confident about the upcoming season than they perhaps would have been in the past. Dan Jackson doesn't sound that way. It's interesting that he doesn't. And some numbers perhaps back up Jackson's confidence. Let me show you this from our friends at FanDuel. Believe it or not, you can already bet on next year's national champion. Not the game that's going to be played on Monday night, although you can do that too, certainly. But next year's national champion. If you're watching on video, you see the graphic on the screen. Just to make things abundantly clear for Ohio State, who does have the best odds right now, in parentheses it says 2026, meaning if you bet this, don't think you're going to cash in after Monday night. This is next year. They make this as clear as possible. It is next year. And if you look here, you see 6 teams listed. Georgia, along with Texas, has the third best odds to win next year's national championship. It's plus 650, which is essentially 6.5 to 1. And this puts Georgia and Texas behind both Oregon and Ohio State. So Ohio State right now has the best odds at plus 450. Oregon next best at plus 600. And then you've got Georgia and Texas right now at plus 650 to win next year's national championship. So Georgia, along the Longhorns, third best odds, and only 2 teams in America have better odds than Georgia does to win that national championship. And once again, when you think about, well, what about all the issues for Georgia? What about the fact that Carson Beck went to play elsewhere? What about the fact that this offensive line's a mess? And what about the fact that a lot of Georgia fans are unhappy with a lot of the assistant coaches? And what about this? What about that? Well, the people who put their money where their mouth is, the people who only care about what makes them dollars, the people that don't have a favorite team, that only have betting slips, the only thing that matters to them, they are the most objective people in the world of college athletics, the odds makers for these sports books. They don't see all that much changing with Georgia. Far better odds than teams that advanced beyond Georgia in this year's playoff. Far better odds for next year's national championship than the team that beat it in this year's college football playoff. Far better odds than other SEC teams that beat Georgia during the regular season. That this sort of felt like a year in 2024 when the overall Georgia program was probably less stable than it's been in the past, and the certainty you've had about Georgia in kind of big games and seasons overall felt less secure than it has in the past. But the odds makers here are saying, well, even after watching that take place, we still don't think all that much has changed with Georgia. We still think Georgia will be among the most likely national champions at the end of next year. Now former players like Dan Jackson are articulating that point too. And if you're a Georgia fan today, I do think you should take some comfort in it. As John Smoltz once said many, many years ago, we may have lost, but we believe we'll be right back in the hunt again next year. For Georgia right now, that is no less true. 2024 ends in disappointment. 2025, though, begins with optimism. If you're a Georgia fan, there's a lot to appreciate about that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Servpro. We're glad you're with us, whether it's video or radio or podcast, all kinds of platforms. Just really, really grateful to all of you for finding one that works for you and being a part of our show. Sometimes you may watch live, like 99.9% of the audience, whether it's listening podcast, watching on video, kind of on demand after the fact. We're just glad. So many of you will never interact with, will never get a chance to maybe know your name, but we are as appreciative of you as anybody could ever be for anything. You truly keep us in business here, and we're so thankful to that. We're also thankful to our friends at Servpro, too. Speaking of great businesses, Servpro is certainly one of those because, I mean, how cool is this to be a business that's sort of dedicated to people in their time of need? And that's what Servpro is all about, you know, kind of really coming to the scene in, you know, very, very tough times. You know, if you've got a home that's been damaged by fire, water intrusion, you know, these are huge issues. And, you know, sometimes you make light of it or something like that. But the truth is if it's your property that's in a situation like this that's been damaged, well, that's not a light issue at all. That's almost kind of a panic-inducing thing of what's going to happen next. How do I get this cleaned up? And obviously you want to, I mean, if you could wish it away, you would. If you could, you know, make it like it never even happened, that's what you'd want. Well, that's what our friends at Servpro are really all about. They are restoration specialists. They know how important it is for your peace of mind, or in some cases, this is also a source of income if it's a commercial property or a rental property or something like that. They know how important, you know, restoring your property to its previous structure and previous condition, how important that is to you. And that's the kind of work they want to do to make sure they get that done. Every Servpro franchise is also independently owned and operated. So please find them online at servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. Let the restoration specialists of Servpro get you cleaned up. If you've have property damage by fire, water intrusion, something like that, our friends at Servpro want to help. Online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. Okay. So we've got two great guests today. It's Jake Fromm coming up in a little bit. We'll sort of talk about the aftermath of the Carson Beck decision with Jake here in a little bit. Also, it's Connor Riley coming up in a couple of moments too. And one of the things I want to get into with Connor is some of the stuff that's kind of going on the transfer portal right now. There's rumblings and grumblings about this and that when it comes to Georgia and some of the late stuff here. So we'll let Connor tell us more about this here coming up in a little bit. Looking forward to that. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. And I want to take a moment to appreciate the way in which a former dog seems to be coming into his own right now here in the NFL. And I could not be happier about this. I think it's a really cool and inspiring story, but it's also just an incredible success story for Nolan Smith, who was really a part of a wonderful win for the Philadelphia Eagles this weekend against the Green Bay Packers. And obviously we know how much Philadelphia sort of committed itself to bringing in as many former Georgia Bulldogs as possibly can, including Lewis Cine, I guess, recently as a free agent. Like they have been, you know, just really, really invested in these, you know, these former Georgia Bulldogs here, kind of viewing UGA as sort of a one-stop shop for the talent they want to have with their organization. And in a weird way, it's made a lot of Georgia fans of the Eagles because of how, you know, and Howie Roseman, the GM, I guess, has been the most outspoken guy about this, about how much they value players from Georgia. And a lot of these guys have been drafted in recent years, are now in the NFL, really starting to come out of their own. I think you can make the case that Nolan Smith perhaps played his best game in the NFL in the playoffs this past week. No big surprise there. He'd step up in a big game, just given the way in which he was always so competitive at the right time for Georgia. But after the game this weekend, Eagles coach Nick Siriani really was complimentary of Nolan Smith in a way that I thought was really cool. I want to let you hear a little bit of this. This is audio only. It is Siriani praising Nolan Smith. I think you'll like this a lot. Take a listen to this.
Nolan has just continued to get better. Nolan, I gave him a game ball in there because just his efforts. I love Nolan Smith. I mean, I want my kids aren't going to play defensive end. I know that my two sons aren't going to play defensive end. They're not going to have the genes to do so. But I want my sons to play football like Nolan Smith. As hard, like before my kids go out to play any sport, I say have fun, play hard, be physical, and that guy is the definition of those things. He has fun out there. He does fun with his teammates. His teammates love him. He plays hard as I've ever seen anybody play, and this dude is a physical guy.
I mean, how much do you love that? Zach Elb, the reporter that captures that. Like, how good is that from Siriani talking about Nolan Smith? There was another great quote from Smith after the game where he talked about how growing up in Savannah, he really sort of thought, man, I'm supposed to be there working at the port and kind of doing that every day, night shift. My dad worked at night, so I know what that means. Nolan says that's really what I thought my life was going to be. So why wouldn't I go out there and give it my all in the NFL every single Sunday? And I'm telling you, stories like that are so inspiring. And for those of us who are big Georgia fans, to see these former Dogs who contributed to championships here now going to the NFL and helping those teams perhaps compete for championships, it just brings back so many good memories. And obviously the 2021, 2022 seasons, not really that long ago, but it's almost like even though it's just 24 months ago, whatever it was, a couple of years ago, I already am so nostalgic for those teams, the players on those teams, how cool all that was. Just so many great memories, and so cool to see Nolan Smith demonstrating the same kind of intangible characteristic in the NFL that he put on display while at Georgia. And there's also selfishly that desire to, here at UGA, how do you get that back? How do you, not to say that Georgia didn't have some of that this year, but how do you have whatever that spirit is resonate through the entirety of the locker room and infect every player on this team? And maybe it's just not always possible. I mean, and I'm not saying that Georgia didn't have that in large measure this year. For all I know, they did. Sometimes it's sort of hard to know what's happening behind closed doors. But we would no doubt say that whatever made Georgia in those two national championship years was truly special. And it was genuinely intangible. Like literally intangible in the fact that it's almost hard to describe exactly what that feeling was, but the feeling was obvious, and it still permeates now as these guys have moved on to the NFL. So kind of just for fun there for a minute, some really nice praise for Nolan Smith, really earning every word of that with the way he's playing right now for the Philadelphia Eagles. And these NFL playoffs, a lot of fun for a lot of us who are seeing so many Dogs contributing there and doing well. By the way, shout out to Matthew Stafford, leading the Rams for an upset victory last night. That is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Servpro. We got Jake Fromm coming up in a little bit. Going to be fun stuff with him today, getting into the aftermath of Carson Beck's decision. But for now, transfer portal rumors, what's real, what's not. Let's cover all of that and more with Connor Riley here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Servpro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let me say hello to Connor Riley. Always glad to have him. Lot to get to. And Connor, if you don't mind, I want to kind of get into the weeds here for a little bit with some of the transfer portal stuff that seems to be going on. There's been chatter about, is it Deshaun Purdy? Is that the guy's name that was at Charlotte? We know had some, Georgia had at least had some interest in him. Purdy ends up going to Florida, but now he's not. You'd presume, well, there you go. That's that. Now Georgia's going to swoop in and get him, but maybe by SEC rule, they're not going to be allowed to. What can we say right now about what is going on here with the former Charlotte 49er quarterback, I guess very, very briefly at Florida, now on the open market, but perhaps also now not coming to Georgia? What do we make of all this?
Yeah, so I think it's clear that Georgia has wanted additional quarterback help in the transfer portal this offseason. You look at the guys they've been linked to, Fernando Mendoza out of Cal, he ends up at Indiana. Dylan Lonergan was a name that was mentioned. He ends up at Boston College. And then Deshaun Purdy from Charlotte, who ended up at Florida. At least so we thought. Yesterday, Purdy is granted his release from Florida, and he's able to look elsewhere. But it's important to note that he signed a grant of aid with Florida, which is effectively the new version of the national letter of intent. And because he signed that document, he is now no longer able to transfer within the SEC this season because of the eligibility rules that the SEC has that exist when it comes to these grant of aid things. You can note that, yes, Oregon released Dallas Wilson, the wide receiver, from its grant of aid, and he was able to transfer ultimately to Florida. But that was a Big Ten to SEC move there. And so we'll see if they're able to navigate this and move around the bylaws that currently exist. I do expect Georgia to try and add help at the quarterback position, while I still firmly believe that Gunnar Stockton is going to be Georgia's quarterback to open the 2025 season. The three guys on the roster that Georgia has that are on scholarship at quarterback have played a combined 0 games in college. And so I think that they're going to want to find someone that at least has some experience, a capable backup that can come in and won't be completely overwhelmed. But as it stands right now, Georgia's at 4 scholarship quarterbacks, and I don't see a path forward, at least as presently presented, for Deshaun Purdy being a 5th quarterback.
All right, so obviously Gator hater here, so I'm going to be self-serving and try to paint Florida in the most negative light possible here for a moment. Is it fair to say that Florida is blocking this young man from doing what he wants to do and come to Georgia, or does Florida not actually – is this a hard and fast rule that can't be broken, or is this perhaps Florida saying we're not going to, grant a release here for him to go to UGA? How much power does Florida have in determining where Purdy does go if he's not going to stay with Florida?
I think this is a hard and fast rule that maybe can't be broken. I don't put this a ton on Florida. And in a new NIL world, I put some of this on Purdy as well. When you're making this decision, and Georgia very much wanted Purdy the first time around, I'm not sure what changed with Florida between when he signed with them, I believe on December 28th, to now. Like, DJ Lagway was still going to be Florida's starting quarterback next year, and Purdy wasn't likely to change that. And so I'm curious as to what led to this decision from Purdy to enter the transfer portal, when there was always an interest in Georgia. And I understand you, as the chief Gator hater, have to paint Florida in as negative light as possible here. I'm just curious, and especially because I think some of us have seen the Rick Barnes comments that he made this past weekend during a Tennessee basketball game. I'm interested moving forward in situations like this where the player changes course and does things in this manner. Obviously, in some ways, this probably has a negative impact in Georgia in that regard, and Florida's not too upset by it. But Florida clearly wanted Purdy for something, because otherwise, why would you pursue him in the transfer portal in the first place? For him to ultimately elect to look elsewhere and go elsewhere, I put more of this particularly on Purdy than I do necessarily on the University of Florida. Sorry to rain on your Gator hater parade.
No, that's fine. And if I'm being objective here for a minute, too, I guess to put myself in Florida's position for a moment, which is not a comfortable spot for me to be, I'm sure they must be looking around wondering, what's the point of having somebody sign something? If signing something doesn't end the recruitment, then what is the point of any of this right now? I'm sure they must feel that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some level of tampering going on. There's tampering going on at all schools. All schools do it. All schools engage in it. And so if you're Florida, you're probably like, what's going on here? I thought we had over and done this, and now it turns out we're not. And especially because, let's not forget, earlier in this transfer window, Georgia flipped a Florida commitment from the transfer portal, Adrian Maddox of UAB. Yeah. So, the rivalry has maybe been a little lopsided on the field of late, but in the recruiting industry, it seems like Georgia and Florida are still going right at each other in the transfer portal.
So the other portal thing that's interesting me right now is that Damon Wilson doesn't yet have a new home, although I don't think there's really any candle in the window. It doesn't seem like anyway for him coming back to Georgia. For the most part, it seems like Wilson's going to play elsewhere, whether it ends up being Ohio State or ends up being Missouri. But we're also kind of led to believe that Georgia tried to find sort of an edge rush replacement, McQueese Grace. Now, whether Grace is as good as Wilson, I don't know, but he was very productive at South Dakota. And yet Grace ends up going to Kentucky, which I think is where he was sort of favored to go before Georgia kind of got involved. So lo and behold, it sort of seems like this winter portal is going to end without Georgia kind of bolstering its crop of edge rushers here right now. How problematic do you think that is with only a short window remaining in the spring? Because I'm assuming that the rest of what's in the portal now is a little bit picked over probably. So Georgia seems destined to lose Wilson with no obvious replacement lined up right now.
Yeah, and I'm interested in sort of seeing how active that April window is, because I just sort of look around at college football. There are still a lot of programs with needs. You look at Penn State, a team that just went on a deep playoff run, and yet they couldn't complete a pass to a wide receiver in their loss to Notre Dame. They need wide receiver help. Miami, now with Carson Beck, getting him at the 11th hour via the transfer portal, that's great for them for their quarterback position. They're losing their top 4 pass catchers from this past season. And so I wonder what they look like in that spring window. And then at Georgia, yeah, I think edge rusher is a position of at least question. I know you and I last week differed a little bit on how we view this position and what Georgia wants to get out of it. And I think that's part of the reason that Damon Wilson is ultimately playing elsewhere. They just don't ask their outside linebackers to get after the passer every snap. They ask them to do a lot of different things. And I don't think Damon Wilson wanted to do those things. And it's still an important role to play. And you know, guys like Gabe Harris and guys like Quintavious Johnson, the more experienced guys in this roster, I think they're more line of scrimmage run defenders than they are the guys that will occasionally drop back into coverage when asked to do so. So it'll be interesting for me to see what Georgia goes about doing and who it can possibly get out of that spring transfer portal window. Because edge rusher, even if it's not, you know, as important as I think it is in the Georgia defense as, like, say, the safety position or the inside linebacker position, it's still a position where they ask them to do a lot of different things. And like Chaz Chambliss had a really strong season this year. Jalen Walker won the Buckus Award in part because of what he was able to do as an outside linebacker. While, you know, Damon Wilson, I think, obviously would have helped this program a lot, and they do have some capable bodies as well as 3 really talented freshmen. They're going to have to find a replacement for what Wilson was projected to bring to this team.
So a few days ago, Carson Beck made the surprising decision to transfer as opposed to going to the NFL draft, and then after that made the very unsurprising choice of going to Miami as his transfer destination. Since then, you've written some really interesting things about Beck. How do you think Carson's going to be remembered here at Georgia?
I think as we get further away from it more fondly, just because I sort of think that's how all quarterbacks, you know, tend to get viewed, a lot of intense criticism in the moment. And then as we see other players, it changes a little bit. Obviously, I don't think this 2024 season went as planned for anyone, both Beck and Georgia. And I know one of the big questions in the fallout from this Carson Beck move was, well, was coming back to Georgia an option? And I think you and I are in agreement on this. I think it was time for both sides to have a break and to just move on and to do other things. I think this season was exhausting for both Carson in terms of what he had to deal with. And I think it was exhausting for Georgia in terms of some of the things that they had to deal with in terms of Carson and the unwanted necessarily attention that was sometimes brought because of the way that, you know, he chose to live his life. And so you look around, and I wrote about it today for DawgNation. You know, yes, so many of the numbers that we've gone through this past season, you know, Georgia leading the country in drops, worst rushing offense that they've had under Kirby Smart. You know, one other thing that was of interest to me that I came across last night, and you know, we talk so much about quarterbacks and passing offense that, you know, sometimes the run game gets skewed. Georgia only had 55 rushes this year of 10 yards or more. Yeah. The previous low for a full non-COVID impacted season for Georgia was 86. That is a significant drop off there. And I think it just sort of speaks to, again, the all-around issues that came with this offense this season. Carson shoulders some of that. He doesn't shoulder all of that. I think as we get further away, I think that win over Tennessee should be remembered. I think how he played in the second half of that Georgia Tech game was incredible. And you've been banging this drum loudly. His final play as a Georgia Bulldog is him coming in with a torn elbow ligament in the SEC championship game when he absolutely didn't have to do that, and found a way to help that Georgia team win an SEC championship. And I made these remarks on social media over the weekend. I know Texas and Penn State got farther in the college football playoff this year than Georgia did. I still believe Georgia had a better season than either of those programs, and I think Carson Beck is a big reason why, and I hope that as time passes, it gets remembered for that.
I think guys like J.T. Daniels and Jacob Eason had pretty dignified exits from Georgia. They went on to play elsewhere without a whole lot of fanfare. I would say from obviously a very pro-Georgia perspective, I think they handled their business in the right way. They didn't tarnish Georgia on their way out the door. Given Beck's proclivity for all these goofy online videos, would you trust Carson Beck to kind of handle this the same sort of way moving forward?
I think so. And with Carson, like, again, he was already out for the season when he declared for the draft, and he waited until the season was completely over to enter the transfer portal there. So in that sense, it does mirror the JT Daniels and Jacob Eason exits. I think it is in some ways, though, a little similar as well as the Justin Fields exit, which I know, again, that was early transfer portal days, and we didn't really know how to handle everything there. But I don't think Kirby was particularly pleased about how Carson handled that time from after his elbow was injured to having surgery there. And I think that rankled some feathers. And I think that's part of the reason why Carson Beck coming back to Georgia for another year was not necessarily an option on the table. And so, again, so much of this is going to play out based on how he does at Miami. And if Georgia sees Miami in the college football playoff next year, if Carson, they go 10-2 and they miss the playoff again, I'm sure most people will be fine with it. Georgia never saw JT Daniels when he was at West Virginia or Rice, and they never saw Jacob Eason when he was at Washington. Carson Beck has to play Georgia. I think that changes things in that regard. And so, with Justin Fields, they never played him, but he obviously led Ohio State to a national championship game appearance in 2020 and led them to a playoff in 2019 when Georgia missed the playoff and had a tough season with Jake Fromm. So I think how Gunnar Stockton does in all of this as well impacts how Carson is sort of viewed in that light now that he is down at Miami.
If you want the best from Connor Riley, our brand new DawgNation newsletter, we're calling it our Hunker Download. Great way to get that delivered right to your email inbox. Check out DawgNation.com/newsletter. You can sign up. The best of DawgNation delivered right there to your email inbox every single day. I'm a part of this too. It's a lot of fun. I think you'll love it. So check it out online, DawgNation.com/newsletter for more on that. DawgNation.com/newsletter. Hot topic last few days, Connor, has been, aftermath of the season, fan frustration with, you mentioned, issues with the running game, offensive line kind of, connected to that, struggles for the Georgia offense, other topics too. You expect any coaching changes this offseason? And what do you make of a mostly successful program with, at least for the moment, a fairly restless fan base, kind of wondering how it gets back on track for 2025?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's definitively going to be a coaching change. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one in some way. I think with what we've seen from the NFL cycle in recent years and guys moving on, and it always sort of seems to be a February surprise. Matt Luke retiring after the 2021 season. Brian McClendon last year taking a job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after being a college lifer. It just sort of seems like February is the month for that as the NFL cycle gets set and teams hire their coaches and go from there. So I think I would look towards February if there's going to be a coaching change there. I don't expect Georgia to move on from Mike Bobo as the offensive coordinator. I'd be borderline shocked if that happened. I know that the season didn't go as planned, but I was talking with a buddy the other day. If I told you before the season that Georgia was going to score 34 points against Clemson, 34 points against Alabama, 31 points against Tennessee, and 30 points against Texas in those games, you'd taken that, no questions asked, from the Georgia offense there. And so I look, Mike obviously has a ton of pressure on him going into that 2025 season. Gunnar Stockton has been a guy he's long been linked with. And, Gunnar did some good things in that Notre Dame game. And they've got to find a way to elevate the rest of the offense around Gunnar, because I think what that Notre Dame game showed more than anything was that while, yes, quarterback was an often discussed point during this season, everything else around that quarterback was not championship caliber. And at Georgia, winning an SEC is great. And I think this one in particular will be remembered fondly, but they want to be playing on Monday night in Atlanta, not losing in the quarterfinals there. And so that's something that's going to have to be addressed moving forward.
Connor, great stuff. We appreciate you and all the stuff you're writing there at DawgNation.com. We'll look forward to reading that and having you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Servpro, again very soon.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great stuff from Connor Riley. It's Jake Fromm coming up. Prior to that, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, man, I'm excited about our DawgNation cruise coming up in April, and also kind of trying to figure out when else I can maybe make on a Royal Caribbean cruise here at some point in 2025. Starting to try to get the wheels turning on that here a little bit and kind of do some scheming back channel conversations. We'll see if we can make something happen on that front. You should be doing the same thing because it's a wonderful year for Royal Caribbean, whether it be Utopia of the Seas, which right now is the newest of the Royal Caribbean cruise ships. But don't forget, coming up this summer from Port Canaveral, we'll get the debut of Star of the Seas. It's going to be the brand new Icon class ship, the first to set sail from Port Canaveral. Really exciting things happening for Port Canaveral. Also, right there, Paradise Island, the Bahamas, you get the brand new Beach Club from Royal Caribbean opening up there. For those sailing to Nassau, going to be a great experience. There's just so many new things happening for Royal Caribbean. A great travel agent named Jessica Slater wants to help you with all of it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater, dreamvacations.com. Jessica knows Royal Caribbean well. That's why Royal Caribbean trusts Jessica to help all of you with your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs, including our DawgNation cruise. She can tell you about all of that. I begin our SEC through here, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, with good news. It happened yesterday. Georgia has entered the basketball top 25, coming in at number 23. After what has really been a remarkable start of the season, including 2 ranked wins last week, as you know, against Kentucky and then Oklahoma on Saturday. But, man, what a week is coming up for Georgia here right now. At Tennessee on Wednesday, hosting number 1 Auburn on Saturday. And really, when you look at it, the SEC's dominance of the basketball top 25 is crazy. Auburn's number 1, Bama's number 4, Florida's number 5, Tennessee is number 6, Kentucky is number 8, Texas A&M is number 11, Mississippi State is number 15, Ole Miss is number 21, Georgia's number 23. I mean, can you believe that? The presence of that many SEC teams in the top 25 right now. So we've been saying this over and over. It's worth repeating again that this is a Georgia basketball team better than it's been in years. But it's also an SEC that's depth is almost beyond belief right now. What a fascinating winter this is going to be heading towards March. And how much fun is it to have the real genuine belief that Georgia's going to be a part of the March storylines right now. I love all of that. Interesting news coming out of the NFL. This is away from the SEC, but still of note for SEC fans. I guess it was Adam Schefter who kind of started all this. But it appears that Deion Sanders, the Colorado coach, has had conversations with Jerry Jones with the Dallas Cowboys coaching opening now that Mike McCarthy has been fired, would seem to be on his way to Chicago to coach for the Bears. And look, on the one hand, I think that Deion is a remarkable coaching story. And it's almost like 2 years ago when he started his career, and there was so much like unearned hype and like national media attention, essentially trying to cultivate non-college football fans to come into the sport. That's really what a lot of that was. Kind of hyping Colorado as a playoff team, an eventual national champion, all the stuff that turned out we knew at the time, those of us who live in college football kind of knew that was silly and nonsense, but non-college football fans could be easily tricked by stuff like that. And that's really what that was. It was an attempt to trick non-college football fans into getting into a story that was being overhyped way beyond any kind of sense of reality. But it almost does a disservice to Deion because since then, like what Colorado did this past year was a real legitimate accomplishment. Being kind of a fringe playoff contender, being near the top of the Big 12, winning, 9 games, whatever it was. It's a real season for a guy that, has only kind of just started his college career and moved up very quickly in the coaching ranks as he did, and now getting what appears to be genuine interest from the Dallas Cowboys. We'll see where this goes. Deion himself has said that he's, I guess, to paraphrase, flattered by the attention, but also likes it in Boulder too. So he's obviously weighing all of his options here. The other thing that comes to mind for me about this is what this means for Julian Juju Lewis. And I'm not picking on Juju or anything like that, but it's really amazing how that recruitment never quite became what I thought it was going to be. A couple of years ago, I thought this would be the most talked about recruit, really kind of in the history of DawgNation, but it never really happened. He was committed to USC for a long time. Georgia just seemed like it wasn't that interested, more interested in whether it be Matt Zollers or, Ryan Montgomery, other quarterback. It just sort of seemed like Georgia was content to go elsewhere. Auburn was sort of more into, Knight as opposed to Juju. And ultimately, Juju goes to Colorado with the full knowledge that you can't guarantee that Deion's going to stay there forever. Really kind of a fascinating thing. But ultimately, I'm sure Juju, as much as anybody, is sitting around watching, well, is Deion even going to be here next year? Obviously, we'll all be curious about that. I was going to do a story on Paul Feinbaum. let me just kind of push that aside. We'll save that for later because I don't want to keep our guests waiting. And we'll call that Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. The reason why we don't want to keep Jake Fromm waiting is because it's a very busy week here for Jake Fromm and his Detroit Lions teammates. We'll do a Kroger Fresh Take and say hello to him here right now as the Lions getting ready for a big divisional round playoff weekend. I guess, Jake, first of all, let me say good morning to you and thank you for being with us here. I know how busy it is. And I'm curious, as someone who was a part of a lot of like game plan prep during your time in college, as you observe this happening in the NFL, how similar or different is the preparation, film study, talk, chatter for these like grown men in the NFL? How similar or different is it from what you experienced while you were in college?
Yeah. Hey, Brandon, what's up? Thank you for having me this morning. The preparation, it's amazing how much football you can talk about when all you have to do all day is talk about football. So, and the coverages, you start getting so in depth, the install meetings, how many more plays you have. And then when you start getting into week 18, 19, 20, into the NFL football season, there's a lot that's built up, a lot we've already talked about. There's less really physically that you're doing at this point and more mentally, that you're watching the film, that you make sure you're getting good plays that you want, and talking about situational football. So, man, it's really fun. It's really exciting. And this is what it all comes down to, man, all on the journey to hopefully win a Super Bowl.
Not sure how much of the wild card weekend you got a chance to watch, including last night, Matthew Stafford leading the Rams to an upset win. But I think for a lot of us, and I think you know this about me, I'm so into college football. I'm not as into the NFL. I never really have been. I do enjoy watching this time of year, though. And as someone who kind of watches the NFL from kind of a, I guess, Georgia-centric, college football-centric viewpoint, it is so cool to see how many like former Georgia players, so many of them from like the 2021 national championship team alone, like how many of these guys are also kind of doing now the same thing in the NFL. I just find that to be so much fun, whether it be Nolan Smith, we talked about earlier, but you got George Pickens making plays for the Steelers, displaying a very interesting personality in Pittsburgh too, of course. But you just got so much of this where like there are so many former Dogs kind of really populating rosters and doing big things. And that was really, for me, a lot of what the wild card weekend ended up being about.
Yeah, no doubt. The Dogs are littered throughout these NFL playoffs. Just watching the Eagles and Packers game, that game got a lot of attention, a lot of hype. Nolan Smith had an incredible game. Man, it's so fun to watch former Dogs, and then especially a lot of them former teammates that you're watching just continue to have success on Sundays. It's so fun, man. It just kind of makes you a little joyous, a little happy in your heart. And you want nothing but the best for these guys. And then two, going to Matthew Stafford, just a guy who's been doing it throughout the league, man, for years and years. And he continues to play at a high and elite level. And it's fun to watch. And as a guy like me, it's really fun to continue to watch him, just try to, better myself and get better at my position.
Yeah. I mean, one more thing on this topic, then we'll shift gears. But like when I watched, Stafford last night, I think as I get older myself, the thing that I'm the most impressed with in football is the notion of like longevity. Thomas Davis played for a long time in the Carolina Panthers. Stafford now doing it for a really long time. And this is a sport where wear and tear on your body, just the young, hungry guys kind of always kind of coming, after you. They want to take your spot, things like that. For a guy like Stafford at this stage of his career to still be doing it at that high of a level, I just find myself really impressed by longevity and the fact that, and I hate to say it this way, but even after kind of all these years, Stafford's still out there leading his team to wins and advancing the Rams in the playoffs. I just really find that to be very inspiring.
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously you take, the physicality part that goes into it. I mean, can your body continue to sustain years, and then how long this season is, and then mentally and emotionally as well. I think that is completely underrated. Man, and obviously having a paycheck that does it week in and week out definitely helps. But man, it cannot be taken for granted of just how really impressive being able to play at a high level for as long as you're doing really is.
So obviously a little bit less fun is the topic around, Carson Beck. A lot of emotions from a lot of fans last few days now that it has been discovered that he is going to transfer and going to go to Miami. What's your read on all this?
Yeah, it's just kind of new for me. He publicly, declared for the NFL draft, and then with just this new NIL transfer portal, there's always these wrinkles and twists that end up happening, and gets a call from Miami, gets a nice kind of payday to go there, and I mean, if you're looking at it on paper, to me, logically, it makes a lot of sense. Having the UCL injury kind of dropped his stock a little bit, maybe not had the season that he wanted to have or dreamed to have this football season as well. So why not go get paid and then have a very good opportunity to improve your draft stock as well. So like on paper, it makes all the sense in the world. And we'll just kind of have to see. This is going to be so interesting to see how this plays out. And hopefully he recovers well from his injury.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the fact that you got to assume that injury is going to impact his draft status, and if the reports are true, whether it be the $3 million number or the $4 million number, whatever else, I mean, I don't guess you could turn that money down if you're Carson Beck. I mean, it seems like almost like a no-brainer situation for him, but I'm almost more interested in the Georgia part of this because, Jake, we would presume that Carson made a good bit of money this past year for Georgia, and I don't throw dirt on Carson by saying this, but given the results this year, if you're Georgia, I don't know how you could go back down that same road again, a financial investment that, to be frank, not always Carson's fault, but nonetheless, the results were what they were. It didn't always work out the way in which I think Georgia probably wanted it to. Do you think it's unfair to say that Georgia might be as ready for a fresh start on this as Carson Beck is himself?
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I think both sides probably mutually felt that way. I mean, there's a reason that he's not coming back to the University of Georgia, and I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know what all those reasons are, but Gunnar went in and played well. That's something to think about. Whether this was already kind of done beforehand. I don't think so. I don't think he would have publicly declared for the NFL draft had he known that he was going to Miami this whole time. So I think this is a new development. I think it was just something that popped up and said, man, he kind of went to, himself and his camp. He said, I don't think it makes sense to turn this down. Why turn down a given $4 million for, an NFL situation that I don't know what I'm going to get myself into. So I think that's just kind of where he's at. I don't think Georgia was kind of willing to cough up that kind of money. And, quite frankly, at this stage in college football, money talks.
Of course, you have every right not to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There was some reports from CBS Sports about perhaps tension between Beck and Georgia, some of that related to the fact that Beck really wasn't around very much prior to the Sugar Bowl, not seemingly all that a part of the game plan prep for Gunnar Stockton, the way we had seen JT kind of do for Stetson Bennett just a couple of years earlier, even though Bennett had kind of beaten him out for the starting job. JT, knowing was going to transfer, was still a really big part of that championship run for Georgia. Do you think Carson owed Georgia a little more presence in the lead up to this Sugar Bowl? He was at the game, but apparently he was not around very much prior to that. Do you think Carson owed Georgia more than that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really kind of tough thing to say and do it because I'm not going to pretend to put myself in his shoes. Sure. Would I personally probably have been around a little bit more? Yeah, but I wasn't in that situation, and I'm not in that. I wasn't in his shoes during that time, but yeah, it's very tough. I think a lot of people probably would have handled it differently, but man, I don't know. That one's tough for me. I probably would have handled it slightly different, but then again, man, it's a different and new world that we're in now in college football.
That's fair enough. It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. Don't forget, you want to take advantage of all the best that Kroger has to offer. The Kroger Boost membership program, great way to do that. You're already buying stuff at your local Kroger anyway. Why not earn fuel points for doing so? And as a Kroger Boost member, you get twice the fuel points for the things you're already buying. That gives you a chance to save up to $1,000 per year. You can also take advantage of free grocery delivery, free grocery pickup. So there's a lot of conveniences kind of added in on all this too. So it's a great time for you to become a Kroger Boost member. Check out more online at Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. Jake, let me finish with this. Obviously, for Gunnar Stockton, there's a lot of enthusiasm, especially after how Gunnar's played, about what his 2025 is going to be. There's also, and you know how it goes, there'll be the comparisons of, well, Gunner's doing this at Georgia while Carson's doing whatever at Miami. If you are Gunner Stockton, how do you keep from letting that sort of creep into your thought process of whether it be Carson Beck or anybody else, what they're doing? How do you kind of keep your main thing the main thing if you are Gunner Stockton, knowing that some of those conversations are just, they're just guaranteed to happen, essentially?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one for him to kind of manage really throughout the offseason and throughout the regular season next year in college football. So, man, just really stay committed to your guys, the process of what he's going to be going through. I think in this day and age, I think so many people are so outcome driven and kind of what happens, and they kind of shy and they get away from what the process is about and what it says. And man, for me, I want my process to be good. Man, if I can say, hey, I did this, I checked this box, I did this, the results should come, but they may not always come. But man, I want to make sure I have a good process behind and a good rhyme or reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. So for him, man, stick to the technique, stick to the little things, stick to the fundamentals, and let the results kind of come. But man, it's going to be fun for him, and I'm really, really excited to see what kind of spring, what kind of fall camp he's going to have, and really excited about Gunner Stockton this fall.
No, I think all of Dawg Nation agrees on that point. A lot of good things in store, we believe, for Gunner Stockton. Jake, great stuff. Appreciate you being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. You're always so generous with your time. Enjoy the week. Good luck to the Detroit Lions, and we will talk to you here very soon.
Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm, terrific former Georgia quarterback who kind of knows, man, and, kind of been through all of that and seen that experience. And there is something that you gain in terms of insight that I can speculate about. And I would say that I have, decent, kind of like, what do you call it, like emotional intelligence. I sort of have some intuition how it perhaps feels to do this or do that. But there is still something about like living through it that I just think gives you a completely different perspective. And so Jake is kind enough to share that with us, and I'm very grateful for that. One of these days, maybe I'll take Jake Fromm to lunch to say thank you. And if we did go to lunch, I'll tell you a great place we could go, and that's our local Surcheros here. Because if you've never had the delicious fresh Mex that Surcheros is famous for, man, I'm telling you right now, it is a great chance for you to try all of that. And as you start thinking about some kind of fun parties coming up in the early part of the year, the big game here in a few weeks, or, perhaps if you want to make Monday's national championship game a little bit more palatable, getting some friends over and having it catered by our friends at Surcheros, a great way to do all of that. Think about like big party, 10 or more people. You bring all this food in. It's so great. Sort of the friendly Tex-Mex they're famous for, the burrito bowls and all the guacamole, all the fresh ingredients, all the great stuff. This Georgia-grown wonderful restaurant company is all about that. Plus, there are 30 locations right now, but there are even more on their way here in the Southeast here too. So Surcheros is a really fun and growing brand, delicious kind of Tex-Mex style food, wonderful experience. Quesadillas, nachos, tacos, the burrito bowls, all kinds of great stuff. So find your local Surcheros, enjoy it, have them come out and cater a party for you. Make Surcheros a big part of everything you're doing in 2025. Online, Surcheros.com. That's Surcheros, Surcheros.com. All right, we'll give you a golden shoe here today. A lot of chatter about the SEC, even though the SEC is not in the national championship. You'd sort of think that at a certain point that the sort of SEC haters would be content to enjoy the SEC not being there and talk about some of the other teams that are. But no, there's still plenty of chatter about the SEC. Our buddy Jake the Rake points that out here today with a little meme here with the idea that you get the Big Ten guy in the boardroom saying, the SEC is the national title. What should we say? And then you got people saying, we should talk about it a lot or say it constantly. Then somebody else says, I think we should maybe not talk about it. And that guy gets quickly exited from the room out the window there. So Jake the Rake, very funny on that. It certainly does seem that there is a lot of enjoyment of talking about the SEC not being there. You'd almost think some of these SEC haters would sort of focus on who is there. But nonetheless, I will give Jake a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. Our Gator Hater Updater today. How about 1,529 days? Been a long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. We love all of that. That's our Gator hater up there. Speaking of a long time, been a long time since Eddie's been on the show, but he's on his way back very, very soon. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Servpro. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Kind of a brisk pace today. We're like right at 60 minutes after the recent marathons. That's kind of an interesting development. All right, so we'll get your comments. I'm going to start on Facebook today just because I feel like I've been getting to them kind of late into the little proceedings here. So we'll start on Facebook. We'll sort of say hello to everybody. We'll find out what kind of mood people are in, and we'll just sort of see what's going on here. So on the Facebook side of things for a moment, Brian Whitaker says he's ready for Eddie's return. Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no telling what is going to happen with all this. Kyle Cummings also excited about Eddie's return. I'm glad to hear that. Jacob O'Neill and Brian Whitaker talking about Surcheros, and it is always tricky because I'm like a lot of you, if you're a live viewer, now if you're on demand, your experience might be different, but it is currently 11:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That means I am very hungry. Now I'm generally speaking just sort of pretty hungry. That's why I'm fat as a cow right now. Just hungry always, never stop being hungry. But as you get to like 11 a.m., I eat breakfast very early in the morning. If I'm eating breakfast like 6 a.m., by the time you get to 11 a.m., that's a good long span of time. So I'm usually pretty hungry by the time we get to this point of the show. Justin Ham also shouting out Eddie. You love to see that. Brian Whitaker also wants some of those Surcheros tacos, so go ahead and enjoy some of that. Todd Davis says if Carson Beck had gotten a first-round grade, he would have gone to the NFL draft. He didn't get a good grade, and he made a business decision. UGA had already moved on. Beck did 5 years at Georgia, and he graduated from UGA, DGD, he says. Yeah, the DGD part of that is pretty controversial. We've been discussing some of that. I'm not trying to split the difference here and be wishy-washy, but I've said I want to reserve judgment. Let's see how Beck behaves. Let's see how much, I don't know. Let's just see how it goes. And let's see a year from now, 2 years from now, what sort of stands out more in our mind. The way that he played at times while he was here, which was often good, or the things that maybe he did after he left, and maybe the way in which he left, as we just talked to Jake Fromm about a moment ago. There were a lot of people who were not too happy about the lead into that Sugar Bowl, and stuff like that does matter. So I am kind of content to withhold judgment. As far as it being kind of a business decision, I do think that's obviously true. It clearly is a business decision. It's the best that I can tell, probably the right business decision. If you've got a chance to make $4 million, you should probably do that. However, I don't think we can, force fans to apologize if they don't want to view football, college football, in the sort of cold, calculated manner that other people are viewing it as. I'm going to give you a perfect example. One of Carson Beck's business guys, his I don't even call it agent or marketing, whatever, is a guy named Dan Everett, who's done some work with some, other Georgia players, and we've done some stuff with him here at DawgNation before. I don't have any kind of beef with him. But in one of the stories, I think it was at 24/7 Sports, about Beck going to Miami, Everett says, and this is, once again, I'm not criticizing this guy. I'm just saying this is an example of the topic we're talking about. So Everett says, oh, yeah, we think that Miami is a great market. And he goes on to say blah, blah, blah. And, I get the point that he's making, and I'm sure from a sort of business marketing standpoint, a large city like Miami probably does feel like a pretty big market. But here's what I'm here to tell you. If Georgia ever gets a big-time transfer, the way in which Miami seems to be, salivating over a different quarterback every year, I am begging the business reps connected to that player, please don't call Athens a market. Please don't call it a market. Please don't call Georgia a market. Oh, yeah, we're here to untap some growth potential in the southeast sector of the marketplace. Please don't call it a market. I don't know how Miami fans feel about that. Maybe they're fine with being considered a market. But I think of Georgia as a team. I also think of Georgia as a state. I don't want to think of Georgia as a market. Now, listen, you can't be more like capitalist than I am. You can't be more, into, sort of business than I am. Like I like all that kind of stuff. I make my living in business. I am very pro-business, if you want to say it that way. I don't want to think of a college football team as a market, though. And I don't want, player reps to call it a market. And I say that, with no beef for the guy who said it. I'm just saying that's an example of the kind of thing that some college football fans are going to have a little bit of a hard time making peace with, no matter how less true it is. Let us see what else. Kent Holcomb says that he hopes Eddie comes back with a lady friend. So I will tell you this. That's not going to happen, I don't think. But it does bring to mind something that Connor and I once talked about. Sometimes, like Connor and I frequently sit beside each other during the Georgia games, and sometimes when games, and I'd love to tell you that every game is equally interesting, but we all know that's not the case. So sometimes when games are maybe not quite as compelling as others, there's no telling what we end up talking about. And so one time Connor asked me a question that I thought was very interesting. Oftentimes Kaylee's sitting right there with us too, usually is. But Connor asked me how I would feel if Harry Dawg had a wife. And I was very in favor of that. I think that Harry Dawg should get, because Florida has a female gator to go along. Is it Big Al? Is it there? I always forget if it's the elephant in Alabama or the gator, who's Big Al. But Florida's gator has a wife. Mr. Met has Mrs. Met, right? Now, these are two pretty, decrepit examples if you're a Georgia fan, but nonetheless. So your statement about Eddie getting a wife makes me think that Connor one day brought up the idea that maybe Harry Dawg should have a wife, which I do think is a really good idea. Oh, no. That's not Kaylee expressing a theory. I don't know that that's going to happen, but nonetheless. Very, very funny. Keith Folds agrees that Harry Dawg needs a wife. I think people get a kick out of that. I do. I think that, I'm going to be corny for a second. I worry sometimes that, Georgia football is getting really expensive, and Georgia football is, it's like the game day experience. And listen, I'm not against any of this, but sometimes I feel like the game day experience is sort of less for kids than it used to be. And that's not anybody to blame. There's no problem with that or anything like that. But, I do think more mascots would be sort of a good thing. I think that people would get a kick out of another, Harry, you got Harry and you got Harry's wife, Harrietta, whatever you want to call her. I do think that people would like that. I think that people would like that. I think kids would get a kick out of that. I think it'd be fun. Michael Herron said that Chief Nakahoma used to have a wife. Is that true? So I am just old enough. I want to say the first game I ever went to, I want to say Chief Nakahoma was still there. And I think by the time the second game that I ever went to, that was no longer true. So I think that I came of age sort of at the end of the Chief Nakahoma era. Did not realize that Chief Nakahoma had a wife. Did not know that. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment, see how they're doing. On YouTube, let's see what else. Andrew Hughes also likes the idea of a Mrs. Bulldog. I think that's great. I did not imagine we'd be talking about this today, but I think that'd be great. Paul Moon says, I don't get the bet, Kate, but I should expect it. We did this with Fromm, Eason, JT, and at times Stat. The second our quarterback looks human, we hate him. I'd say there's a degree to which that's true. I also think there is, I'm going to be very honest. I think there's something to be said for sometimes people are a little bit annoying, and I'm sure people think I'm annoying, and I'm sorry if I do annoy you. I don't certainly do it on purpose. Sometimes you just can't help it, I don't reckon. I'll have to admit I do find Beck to be a little annoying. At times I found certain aspects of his persona at Georgia to be a little bit annoying. So here you got this situation where you got a quarterback who's at times doing some really good things for Georgia on the field, and yet I'm also sort of annoyed by some of his other tendencies. And on the shows last couple of days when Beck's been a topic, I've tried to reflect that, which is like, hey, I'm thankful for some of what he did on the field, while at the same time sort of irritated by some of the stuff off the field, and you kind of sort of have to make peace with those conflicting feelings. MG says that, yeah, perhaps that's possibly the case. That's possibly the case. George Griffin also talking about the process of how you could kind of introduce the new dog. I do think like sort of like Harry Dog is going to get a wife. We're going to have like this search and then the final reveal taking place. I think you could get some real juice out of that, some real mileage out of that. It wouldn't do one thing about helping Georgia win a game, but I think kids would probably like it. I think they'd probably enjoy it. Greg Rosenberg says he thinks the hate for Beck is super ugly. I do not think, I mean, at least the majority of what I'm seeing is not super ugly. I think, I really don't feel that way at all based on what I'm observing. I think that people, have sort of shared some opinions here, both positive and negative, but I think there's been, I would say, a pretty well-meaning attempt to sort of appreciate the full Beck era here, both the good and maybe sometimes the not quite so good. Because, like, Beck was supposed to be the guy for Georgia this year. He was supposed to be your answer to not having a Brock Bowers or a Ladd McConkey. And from that standpoint, he did not meet expectations. And so, to act like, well, everybody's just going to be fine with that, that's not necessarily going to be the case. But at the same time, you've also seen a lot of people echoing some of the stuff that I've been saying, which is, yeah, but he still did well in this game, and he still kind of came in at the end of the SEC championship, and he did this and he did that. There is an attempt to appreciate the full measure of the man here, which I find to be pretty commendable. But I don't think it's been ugly. At least unless there's some specific instance you're thinking of that I don't know about. The prevailing narrative that I've seen discussed, in our comment section on social media, I think has been pretty even-handed. Now, Greg also says he doesn't think the Georgia fan base likes flashy. For the most part, that is true. And listen, there are a lot of fan bases that have preferences. Lakers, for instance, they do like flashy. They do want to be Showtime. That's always worked better in LA. That kind of thing doesn't work as well here. The Eagles, Philadelphia Eagles, the fact that, Nolan Smith talks about, he would have been a worker at the Savannah port and working the night shift. And so now he's going to go out there and play hard because he knows what his life could have been. A blue-collar city like Philadelphia is going to eat that up. They are going to like that. Different fan bases do have, they have their own sort of collective personalities. And I would say that the Georgia fan base by and large, now this is not true. There's the Georgia fan base also spans millions of people, at least a couple of million people. So there's going to be all kinds of individual differences within the larger collective. But by and large, I don't think that really flashy has ever really worked all that well here. Maybe one day it will, but for the most part, it just doesn't. That's probably true. That's probably true. Blind Squirrel Sports says, I don't think the Georgia locker room likes flashy. That, I would say, is undeniably true. Remember, like, go back to 2021. Like, we'll talk about Nolan Smith for a moment. Think about, like, the way this team embraced Stetson Bennett And the famous thing that Nolan said after that Florida game when Bennett had struggled, but like Georgia seemed united around him. This team does like its blue collar workers. It does, offense and defense. They do kind of like that stuff. And the best of the Georgia teams, that's what they've been. And look, I also think that Georgia's sort of done its part to kind of cultivate some of that kind of stuff. Like, if you go back and look at 2022, for instance, national championship year for Georgia, in which Georgia really didn't play close games. Like that was a year in which Georgia could have done anything it wanted for the most part. One of the things I think is fascinating about that year for Georgia is how little it threw to Brock Bowers sometimes. Like, there were a lot of games in which Bowers had like 3 catches. That I think that Georgia has been very careful to not put players above other players, and I don't know how much longer that's going to work. I've said that before. Maybe eventually that just doesn't work as well anymore. But even for a guy like Bowers, who could have had, I don't know, the records, all of them, in terms of catches, if that's what Georgia wanted to do, they kind of spent a lot of games trying to get other players involved because that was what they wanted to do. Like, Georgia has worked very hard to not be a flashy program. Even with players like Bowers, who are maybe deserving of the flash, Georgia was content to sort of try to spread that around. Frederick Meredith says the, quote, good old boy mindset's definitely UGA all the way. I mean, I sort of detect a element of sarcasm in how Frederick says that because he puts a good old boy in quotes. But I mean, I think that there's a completely different way of framing that. Georgia wants good guys. Georgia wants good guys. You call them good old boys if you want to. Georgia does want good guys. And the best Georgia teams have had a lot of good guys on them. And I would say in a locker room, the number one definition of who a good guy is from other players' perspectives is someone who you sort of feel like you're in it with and fighting alongside. That Georgia at its best has done a really good job of kind of cultivating a relationship around shared responsibility. That's been an important thing for Georgia. Johnny Surf Dog says, basically on what, kind of the lack of emotion sometimes from Carson. I try to be careful not to read too much into body language. I do, but, I think that it's certainly to listen to sort of Georgia talk sometimes, the little bit more sort of stoic demeanor of Carson was something that people had to try to make peace with a little bit. All right, let me do one more kind of trip around the comment section. We'll get ready to bounce out here for today. At DawgNation.com for a moment. We'll see what's on their mind. UGA Marine says that Bobby Bowden once said he'd take 11 no-star guys with heart as opposed to 11 five-star guys. What we've said here at Georgia, though, is that in reality, like, college football is not a morality play. That, you've heard it said that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Like, that's the important caveat, though, that the idea that I'm going to have 11 hard workers, we're going to go out there and beat more talented players. The truth is, in college football, that just rarely happens. It rarely happens. What has made Georgia special is they have been able to find over the course of years very talented players that were also willing to work and develop the kind of physical and mental toughness required to succeed. That's really been the hallmark of Georgia. It's the sort of five-star athlete with the sort of no-star mentality. That's been kind of the special thing for Georgia. And you really can't have one without the other. Like, if you've got talent but not the special intangible quality, then you're going to probably underachieve. If you've got all the intangibles in the world, but you don't quite have the talent, there's only so much you're going to be able to do. That if you're really trying to compete and win, And if you really are in it to win it, you've got to have elite talent that wants to work hard. And to Georgia's credit, that's what they've done a lot of. Garrison Tucker asked about Roderick Robinson. To my knowledge, was not there. I don't know. I don't. Let me just say that I don't know. Let us see what else. Savannah Bryan likes the idea of Harry Dawg's wife being named Mary. You could have Harry and Mary. I like that. I like that. Let us see what else. Anything else here at DawgNation.com? Senior Dog 54 on the subject of Beck's Lamborghini. It is important to point out, in almost no circumstance did Beck buy that car. We said this at the time, that these things are almost always leases. And could have very well been a lease in the form of an endorsement. That it's just a car you drive, you give it back. This was not a purchase that he would have made. That's kind of the way that sort of goes. Frank says about New Orleans, about Notre Dame, the transfer portal. He says of the 23 points they scored against Georgia, all 23 were scored by transfers. Yeah. I guess it was it Sean McDonough who said this, that they weren't a very heavy transfer team, but they still had like 13 transfers. And as Frank points out, almost all the success they had against Georgia kind of came via the transfer player. That's a pretty heavy transfer team in terms of the true impact players there. And it's kind of weird that narrative is sort of taking shape. It's also like if Notre Dame has 12, 13 transfers, you think Notre Dame is going to be the kind of program that'd be the slowest to embrace that. But even if they're that active in the transfer portal, I think it gives you an idea of just how prevalent the portal now is. All right, a couple of other comments. We're going to get ready to go. Miriam Corbin, complimentary of my hair. I actually did not get a haircut, but my battery pack died, and so I just took the headset off. You probably just don't see it like this very much, but I appreciate that. It's kind words. Thank you, Miriam. Let us see what else. Mitchell Heron on the subject of the energy changing for the better for Georgia in the second half of the SEC championship. I certainly hope that same level of energy that you say that you notice, I hope it can carry into 2025, and that this team can really rally around Gunnar Stockton. I think they have a chance, as we said to start our show today, they have a chance to be really good. But obviously some things need to improve to kind of reach that full potential on that. All right, let us see what else. Finally on YouTube here before we get ready to go. G. Gray says he'd rather live in Miami than Athens. Well, G, I hope you enjoy it down there. Andrew Hughes wondering about the next great Georgia running back, whether or not Georgia will ever have another Todd Gurley. Here's what I'll tell you. We're going to do more of this in the weeks to come. But if you look at what we saw from Nate Frazier during his first year at Georgia, the notion now next Gurley, I don't know, but in line with other, running backs at Georgia who've gone on to have great success, I think there's reason to really be pretty optimistic about Nate Frazier. We'll do more of that in the weeks to come, I believe. Richie Bales giving you a to hell with Tennessee. Already excited about the Wednesday night basketball game there. Big week coming up for these Dogs in the hardwood. Tomorrow in Knoxville, Saturday, a huge home game against Auburn. A lot of excitement about that. Frank Patterson, by the way, checks in to say, I live in Miami, and I'd rather live in Athens. Yeah, I'm right there with you on that, Frank. I'm a little bit more of an Athens personality than a Miami personality, probably. Frank, also, if there's running back talk to be had, Frank's going to be right there in it. There's nobody that loves any position more than Frank loves running backs, and I love that about Frank. He says our running back room this upcoming year is maybe the best it's been since Chubb's freshman and senior years when you had kind of all that talent there together. That's pretty fun. That's pretty fun. Pretty good stuff. Also, our buddy G. Grace is still up in his feelings about Stetson Bennett dragging him to the woodshed a couple of years ago. You hate to see that. You'd love for G. Grace to be able to move on. Some people can't. Lance D says, I'm using Jeff Santel's hairspray. I'm telling you, this is not really that much different than my hair always looks. I just don't have my headset on. If I put the headset back on, it's still the same way. See? That's the way I kind of always look. You just don't ever see that. I just took them off because it's essentially they're not working. Lance D says that Beck is leaving just as the wide receiver room gets better. But I don't view that as a coincidence. I really feel like Georgia's got more money to spend because Carson's not coming back. That if you spend big on Beck, I think you're relying on him to make other players better. But if you don't have that money going to Carson, well, now you can kind of upgrade the room a little bit more. I mean, there's not an official salary cap in college football, but there is a budget. Everybody's operating with a budget, and no one has unlimited, spending ability. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. All right, fun conversation. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including, as we said, you got plumbing emergencies, things like that. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Servpro. We'll look forward to talking to you.